My name is Dan Nolan, and I am here today with Han. A little bit of background on myself. I've been in the Web3 space for quite some time now. Really got excited about education. Did a boot camp called ChainShot, which was an Ethereum developer boot camp, which was acquired by Alchemy. And now we are working on Alchemy University and everything education on the Alchemy side. So, Han, would you like to introduce yourself as well?
Yeah, totally. Really excited to be on this chat. I'm the founder of Shape and also Deca, and it's been quite the journey in NFTs. I got really deep into NFTs and started collecting a bunch of art, and then now here I am doing a lot more with NFTs, and I'm sure we'll talk a lot more about all that stuff. So really excited to be here.
Heck yeah. All right, cool. So maybe we can start diving in. And Han, if you would like to lay out the scope of this conversation, maybe frame it a little bit. If you could tell maybe the origin story to Deca, explain it for anybody who doesn't know what Deca is, and then we could start talking about Shape from there.
Yeah. So Deca is a really NFT native experience. We built quite a few interesting things that allows people to discover NFTs on Deca. So it's a discovery tool. The first big thing out of Deca is the artist page. So you know how basically on crypto, artists have published all these works on all these platforms and all these chains. The artist page is like a great consolidation of all of the works that they have created in a single place. And then you can see all of it in one location. You can buy any of it that's on secondary or even primary. And that's the artist page. And then we also have a really good collector page, which combines all the wallets together. And then you can basically see all the art and all the NFTs that you have purchased. And then a really great leaderboard for people to see like where a collector is in a particular artist's leaderboard. So it's a great set of tools that allows people to really get into NFTs and artists and discover everything. And I bet I actually went really deep into NFTs in that statement. So if there's any clarifying things I could say, I could definitely clarify things.
Oh yeah, that'd be super helpful. I think maybe for anybody that does not know what an NFT is that's watching these videos, you could just think of them as yeah. How would you define it, Han? I'm trying to think like non-fungible token is the actual definition, but it could be so many different things, and I think that's actually a really good thing to bring up in this conversation. Yeah, how would you typically define it to somebody?
Yeah, I think an NFT is really interesting. So it's a digital object, just as a spreadsheet is a digital object, or a domain name is a digital object, or a game inside of massively multiplayer game is an object. So it's a digital object, but the key thing, the key difference between an NFT and those objects is that in many ways, an NFT truly exists,
Hmm.
especially if it's built on decentralized rails. It means that the NFT, for example, cannot be destroyed. It cannot be taken away from you. And then that gives it gives life to that NFT. It actually exists in many of the ways that physical objects exist. And then the additional part about the NFT that I think for this audience it could be really interesting is that it is fully programmatic. So it's an open it's an it really can do anything. You can program it to do anything. So it's a very powerful primitive that is actually quite hard to explain because it's so powerful. And then I would argue that society has first uh, society doesn't actually yet understand what an NFT truly could be.
Yeah, it's super fascinating to me because I feel like maybe mainstream society at large kind of got a glimpse into NFTs, right? Because they really hit mainstream, I don't know what, in 2021, 2020. And we saw it on late night TV shows and like all of this. We saw NFTs everywhere, and there was something to it. Like I think people somewhat understood that there's like ownership associated to NFTs, and I think you really pinned that really, really well. And I think that's going to be an important thing that we're going to come back to later on in the conversation when we talk about Shapecraft. I don't want to jump ahead too far, but like that idea that that data is going to live forever, and it's something programmatic that you can set the rules transparently and anyone can audit. They can see what the rules are for that particular resource, that particular item, NFT, whether it's like an avatar aesthetic, it could be really anything, right? It's so many different things that an NFT can potentially be, but you know that this is something that you can actually look and see maybe how many there are on chain. So you know the entire collection, you know that they're not creating more of them. You know what the rules are in order for somebody to be able to create more. It's possible that you have rules set specifically on chain that say, hey, there's no more of these ever going to be created, right? That's all there ever is, and nobody can ever create anymore, which is a powerful idea in of itself. Um, cool. So I guess maybe what we can do next is jump into Shape. So do you want to talk about the origin of Shape? You know, how you think about it, what its relationship to Deca is?
Yeah, totally. The relationship to Deca, I think, will be much simpler to cover. Basically, they're separate things, and so we carefully we ensure that internally there's always like a firewall between Deca related things and shape related things, because we consider uh, uh, them to be separate. But it's very important for the neutrality of shape that they are considered like separate things. Um, and then what Shape is it's an Ethereum L2, so it's part of the layer 2 scaling of Ethereum. And if you really think about what happened in the 2021 kind of boom that happened for NFTs and all the interest that happened there, um, so a lot of culture settled on Ethereum L1 at the time. So concretely, what does that mean? Well, we had a lot of interesting NFTs that people wanted, they desired to own. They were minted and created and traded on Ethereum L1. Now, as Ethereum scales through layer twos, that culture has to go somewhere. And so what we realized was that when we kind of surveyed the entire landscape of Ethereum L2s, um, uh, we didn't find, and when we talked to artists and creators, we actually didn't find a natural home for all of the culture that wanted to go somewhere. Like they didn't first of all, by behavior, choose to go anywhere, any of the places that existed. And then when we chatted with them by sitting down with them, they actually said that, hey, none of these L2s feel like a home for us. And so we set out to create an L2 for culture, for artists, for creators. And when I think about a chain is we often, I think a lot of us focus on the technology. We often focus on the things that are on there, but ultimately a chain is a collection of people who have chosen to be part of that society. It's often a choice. Every chain has their own, I think, flavor of society. And so we think that there is a chain that should exist, that really just focuses on culture, for art, for creativity. And so that's how we came to build Shape.
Hmm. Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I, have spent a lot of time on the site now, stacking stacks, stacking metals on stacks. And so I've come to really love what you guys have built. And maybe that would be a good thing for us to jump into next. So if you go to the Shape site, it's shape.network. Is that correct? Is that
Yep.
shape.network? You can also stack some metals, and I love the leaderboard dynamic. You guys talked about this, but you were talking about this before in context of Deca, but you guys have also ported that over to this concept of stacks, which I'm sure you'll define in a moment. And for me, when I came to your site when it first launched, all I wanted was more medals. I was like, there was so many. There was like there was a list of things that you could do, and a lot of that really harkened back to things that if you had done them in the Ethereum ecosystem, you got like rewards for doing them, right? You got these medals that said like, oh, hey, you've done this in the Ethereum ecosystem, and you've collected this NFT, you've done this, and I really wanted to move up that leaderboard. That's such a cool dynamic, and it reminds me honestly of when I was playing with it. It reminds me of if you ever read Ready Player One. That was
Yeah.
like the leaderboard was such a key dynamic to that book of like, who's moving up the leaderboard and everybody being able to see where everybody else was. So I love that aspect of it. It's really like gamified. So yeah, could you? I I really nerded out on that. Why was I so excited to stack metals? And can you explain this concept of stacks for the audience?
Yeah, totally. So if you go to stack.shape.network, you can mint a stack. And then what a stack is, it's kind of a guided tour of interesting things that have been deployed on Shape. So there's multiple projects. There's even platforms inside of it. And so when you do things on chain, every on-chain action corresponds, not all, but many on-chain actions correspond to earning like a medal on the stack. And I think it's just really human nature to love basically when you have an action, you earn something. It's such basic human nature to feel like you feel great when something like that happens. And so we took great care to have just the right level of gamification so that it's really fun. Um, and so we designed it to be just a fun system, and uh, 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 and we didn't want the gamification to be like too much.
Mm,
In a lot of systems that have been designed in other parts of this world, some of it becomes way too gamified, and then it's no longer fun. So that was our goal. And then the other part that I'll say about the stack is actually an NFT. So if you
mm,
caught what I said earlier, I said you can mint a stack. It's actually an NFT,
mm,
and so for every person who is part of the Shape network um, and has minted a stack, well, they are every time they are claiming metals, which are also on-chain actions. We're actually writing little bits of data on the NFT. So every stack NFT has all the medals that you've earned, and just going back to what you said earlier, it's an open database. So anybody who wanted to, for example, deploy things to the people who have done things on the stack NFT, well, you can index it and say you can query it and say, get me all the people who have done this action on this project, and suddenly you have a list of addresses that have done that, and then you could, for example, say, hey, that's my allow list for my next project. And so we wanted to make sure that the stack was always we basically walk the talk, as in we wanted to make NFTs as fully programmatic and usable by anyone, and so we put as much data as we could on the NFT itself.
Hmm. Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I love that idea of the fact that it's a data set that you can then use. And my mind already goes. I go to games immediately, and I just think about like, yeah, if you were releasing a game and you wanted people to be able to like alpha it or like play test it and like come in and try it, you could potentially target people that are really going to be excited about that launch and people that you would want to invite to your new world to say, come check it out, right? I know you guys already like this stuff and you can like sort of target them for that. You could give them like items, right? They can come in with a little special badge or like a bird on their shoulder or something. I don't know. There's so many cool things that you could do with it because it's just data, right? That anyone can access and was distributed in this fair and transparent way. So that's super, super cool. And maybe the last thing that we can define before we start to get into Shapecraft and start to talk about the hackathon that we're here to talk about today, could you talk a little bit about gasback? This is a major mechanism that's featured right on your site. Can you talk about like what gasback does and what you guys are hoping to see from the gasback mechanism?
Yeah, so so gasback is really interesting. So on Shape, when you deploy a smart contract, the all the transactions that are executed against that contract, well, every transaction requires gas for the program, essentially the function you're calling and all the things that you're doing to run on the kind of like distributed kind of computer. Um, in Shape, 80% of the gas that is well, the sequencer fees. It's actually a little bit more complex than that, but 80% of some of the fees that are executed that used to execute your call actually goes back to the person who wrote that contract and is an owner of that
Mm,
contract. And so, why is that important? Well, it's such a powerful mechanism for people who have created smart contracts and want to monetize their contract. Well, the network itself provides a native way for that contract owner to monetize it. And so, the more that your contract becomes popular, it becomes gasback. It goes high. So it directly corresponds with the activity of all the things that are happening on your contract. And ultimately, I think it's really like the invisible hand that has been implemented inside of the Shape network. Um, and then we'll cover more about gasback a little bit later, but it really is in the context of like Shapecraft, but it really is a shared incentive layer
mm,
that pulls everything together. And here's why: if somebody calls, so let's say you deployed a contract, and then some other contract's function calls one of your functions, the gasback computation actually will go through and then attribute how much gas was used for, let's say, your function when it was called by another function. And so, by other contracts relying on your contract, you're actually earning gas back, which means you actually want your thing as open as possible, as usable as possible by others. Because if you make it as open as possible and usable as possible, then suddenly you're incentivized to make that happen. And I feel like this is such a great expression of some of the spirit of like open source movement. In many ways, prior to crypto, the open source movement didn't, and even today, it actually struggles with like there will be some critical library that everybody depends on, and then nobody funds the thing. And
okay.
then the moment, let's say that one developer no longer is interested in developing it, like things can go wrong. Um, there have been quite a few like security vulnerabilities because like one library is compromised, and that's because ultimately there was no mechanism for rewarding the contributions to basically the open source movement that was sustainable. In this structure with gasback, it's actually built in such a way that it could be a sustainable kind of future that could be built. So I'm really excited by it.
Yeah, that's a really good comparison to open source. I have friends that have libraries and small plugins and libraries that are being used in so many different places that they're core to like much bigger libraries that everybody uses, right? And they didn't know they were signing on to a lifelong commitment to maintain this thing, right? That's kind of a scary thing, and it's hard to hand it off to the right person if you wanted to do that handoff. I know people have tried it. There have been some stories written of people trying to do the handoff, and then they thought they had like a trustworthy person, turned out not to be. Yeah, it's. I mean, it's something that we have to think about when we have all these libraries that are built upon other libraries, and all those little libraries eventually will have to move to some other maintainer in the future. And how do we handle that? I think that's super cool to like compare it to that, when you're thinking about smart contracts and the life of smart contracts, especially as they can also be upgradable and all of that. I think I'm going to get a little ahead of ourselves here, but gasback to me, I'm really excited about the idea of like, if you have an item, let's say, and you had different worlds that you could take that item to, like, and these worlds could be like metaverse style, like everybody's like in a VR world together and they're just talking, and you're just hanging out with your friends, or they could be games, right? Games or social apps, whatever they are, and you want to be able to move your item into that world, and somebody deploys a smart contract that's a world. If you interact with that smart contract at all to move that item into that world is automatically paid, right, through this gasback mechanism that's fundamental to the whole blockchain, which is super cool, because then you have like the shared incentive layer to sort of build things on top. And if you can realign the incentives so that people collaborate, I mean, the natural sort of tendency for companies is, as they grow their user base, is to centralize and to not collaborate, to close down all third-party integrations, or to figure out just the right business model to like get people to pay as much as they will for the third-party integrations, right? And you have to think about those ways when you're beholden to shareholders. But if you're an open protocol that's being incentivized to collaborate, that's a different way of aligning things, such that, I mean, what does that create? I don't know. That's what's so amazing about it, is like, you sort of put this experiment out there, and if you realign the incentives just right, it's kind of like Bitcoin, right? Align the incentives just right so everybody's running a miner. You create a financial network and decentralization emerges. You realign the incentives so that everybody collaborates, and then all of a sudden you have worlds that are created by people that all interop and cooperate. I think that's super, super cool. But getting
Oh,
way ahead of ourselves.
just one thing I wanted to add, and this is I mean, whenever I chat with you about this topic, I get so excited, and and I know we're getting way ahead, but one thing to add is your what you mentioned, basically, um, um, walled gardens are the logical conclusion to how the world works today. Like, even if they had the right intent, ultimately there's such strong incentives in place that every world that is designed in today's world outside, it eventually becomes a walled garden. And um, and uh, the famous quote, like, "Show me the incentives and I'll show you the outcome."
Yeah.
I so strongly believe in that, and it's such an important idea that if we even, I mean, we certainly have the best of intent, but we have to design the right incentive system, and I think so. We have a chance to completely invert everything in this world that could be created. So I'm so excited.
Yeah. Oh, that's absolutely so cool. Yeah. And if you sort of like align those incentives correctly from the get-go, you can see something, a new type of business model, a new type of company, monetization strategy that maybe we've never seen before. Yeah, I love that. Cool. All right. So we got a little bit ahead of ourselves. I mentioned Shapecraft a couple times, but we haven't defined Shapecraft. So maybe we could talk about like the origin of Shapecraft, and and then we could talk about how like we basically realized that we were we were both excited about the same stuff, right? Like what we're talking about now is some of the things that we talked about initially in some of our early conversations, meeting just a few months ago, and realizing that we had like a very similar vision, something that was super exciting to both of us. So, do you want to talk a little bit about the origin of Shapecraft for viewers who are unaware of what it is?
Yeah, so Shapecraft is, I think the closest term could be a hackathon, but there's a lot of I'd say, like, some nuances there. So the easiest introduction would be, it's a 4-week hackathon that's focused on building forever worlds, and we'll talk about that too. But it is an open-ended um, chance to kind of build really interesting. like things that people can use, things that people that will have fun playing, and then there's existing worlds that have been deployed and created by specific artists and creators, and we can talk about those too. But yeah, it's a 4-week hackathon, and then the difference between or the reason I said that hackathon doesn't fully capture it is because lots of artists will be involved in this hackathon. Because if you look at a lot of the artists that have created essentially their own worlds on the other art, they actually have this world and style that is in their heads, and we want to bring both devs and artists together to create those worlds together.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, it's kind of trying to find three different audiences here, right? We have folks that may be coming and tuning into this conversation that are Web3 developers. You may be a smart contract developer. You may be a Web3 application developer, which are very different skill sets, but some people will have both. And so you may have that Web3 background. Another audience that we'd love to see a lot of is game developers. So game developers would be amazing to see people like really bring these worlds to life. And we're going to be doing more like game development workshops and things like that. So hopefully we'll see a lot more game developers out there. And then, like you said, on tons of artists. So, the prizes are going to be arranged in such a way that, we're going to be able to honor all the people and all the contributions that you could possibly make to this ecosystem. But if you feel like you fall into one of those three camps, then this is a great opportunity for you to come and showcase your skills and to build on top of these worlds that we're going to be talking about. If you don't have those skills or you feel like you're not quite up to speed with those, we are running workshops, and also go to like Alchemy University and you can get up to speed with Web3 specifically. So if you're trying to learn Web3 very, very quickly, you could do that at Alchemy University, or you could tune into our game development workshops. I think that game development has gotten a lot easier now with like the advent of AI tools, such that at least to make like a fun game, like a fun, simple game, you can get there a lot quicker. And you can make like multiplayer online worlds and things that like many years ago would take a lot longer, like weeks and months, now takes days and hours, So we'll take a look at that, and super excited to dive into that. So maybe, Han, can you highlight maybe some of those projects that you were talking about that people could build on top of in this hackathon? DeepL and movable types, I believe, would be two of the projects, right?
Yeah, totally. So two existing projects that have been deployed already, and then a third that is being announced very soon, should be next week. And can't wait to tell everyone about that project. But first, I guess we'll focus on the two projects. So DeepL's, it's a really interesting project by Deca. So they're fun, really cute like characters. So it's like an avatar, and what's really cool about these avatars by DeepL, by Deca, is that these DeepLs, you can put items on them. So what Deca did is that he designed, I think like 100+ items. So like there's like 5 different types of hoodies, there's like 5 different types of shirts, and 5 different types of shoes, and then there's like glasses and backpacks and like necklaces, and so what's so interesting is that you could actually arrange all the items on your DeepL, and then it looks different. I mean, like a lot of DeepLs, they look like the people that own them. And what's actually crazy, and this is a little bit of an aside, but what's crazy about the DeepL project is that like for clothes, you can see clothes online, right? You can go to a retailer website, whatever, and you look at the clothes and you're like, okay, that looks good, and then it arrives and you put it on, it's like, oh, it doesn't look good at all.
Yeah.
Or you go to I don't know if you go to like physical, I don't know if people go to physical shops anymore, but like, you go in, you look at something, it's like it doesn't seem that good, but then you put it on, it's like, oh wait, it looks amazing on me. so what I have found with clothes is that it actually it's highly dependent on the body that it's put on for some reason. And then what I found, okay, so the reason I gave you that aside is that exact thing happened with Deeples.
Mm,
So it's like each shirt is like, it's like a tiny thing, right? It's like a small tiny thing. Um, and you're like, how different could that shirt be from this other shirt?
mm,
And then you put it on your Deeple and you're like, wow, that looks good, or wow, that looks terrible. So like somehow uh, DK, just as a genius behind his art, he actually replicated the exact sense of clothes on Deeple's. So it was, he actually captured the spirit of clothes in some way.
mm.
So anyway, that was too long of an aside. But the idea is that these are infinitely customizable characters, and there will be more of the Deeples that'll be announced soon. And so it'll continue to be a bigger and bigger world. And then you could totally see a world where these Deeples should be running around in basically these games, in these worlds. And so I'm really excited for people to be building on top of Deeples. Um, and then movable type. Um, an amazing project by Def Beef. So Def Beef is really one of the deep thinkers in the space when it comes to thoughtfully, intentionally creating certain things. Um, he created, I think, what is the foundation of all kind of like word games and word, exercises. And um, if you look at all the games that we have created in uh, outside of crypto, a lot of it is so many things. I mean, take Wordle, or even take something as fundamental or historical as a crossword puzzle. They're all word games, and they're based on letters, words. And what Def Beef has created is, on the surface, what seems to be a very simple project that has letters and words, and you can combine them. Um, but it has quite a bit of depth, and actually, Def Beef has written, I think, like a collection of essays of like 5,000 words that delves into the history of words, and it's quite interesting, and um, uh, and I can't wait for people to kind of build on top of it, which will itself be such an interesting exercise. Um, and then there's a third project that is in the works and should be announced soon, and an incredible project that will be another foundational layer. And then the last thing I'll briefly say is that these three projects that we highlight, they represent worlds that you can build on top of, and they are really great worlds to build on top of. And we'll have a prize category specifically for that. But then, of course, we have another category which is completely open-ended, which means you should be able to design anything that you want to use and create. And so there's no limit to, if you want to use worlds that exist, great. If you want to use if you want to create new worlds, well, here's another prize category for that.
Yeah, that's super cool. I was smiling so much when you were talking about the third project. I love that we're releasing alpha here. It's a little bit of a teaser on the third project. We've talked about it. I'm super excited about it. And both the projects that you mentioned, I'm also very excited about. One of the folks on your team sent me over a movable type, and I was like, oh, yes. I think I got to be the Dan in the movable type land. So I'm like super excited about that. Yeah.
I love
So
it.
all these things can be their own worlds that you can build on top of, or sort of like pull them into other worlds, right? Which is super super interesting. And yeah, I guess something that you hit on that I would love to like expand on more, maybe something to anchor the conversation, is this idea of like a forever world. So we've talked about this before in our conversations, and we're kind of defining the idea of a forever world, what it means. So maybe we could like talk about that a little bit. What do you think? Should we dive into Forever World? Okay. So
Yeah, I
maybe we
love
could
it.
so, so maybe we could talk about what it means to us, like what a Forever World is all about. For me, I think I've kind of touched on this before when you were talking about NFTs. living on the blockchain, anything that you're going to put on the blockchain is going to be something that anyone, you could see the rules transparently, right? And the rules may be that here are the rules set in stone, they will never change, that's it, right? The rules could also be here are the rules currently, but here's a governance process to change those rules, right? And that governance process could be something that's like one single owner is deciding what's going to change, or maybe a group of people, or maybe like a DAO, like a large group of people are going to be able to vote in new changes to whatever that thing is. And there are obvious trade-offs to that, right? Maybe not so obvious for folks new to the space, but if you think about just like voting in general, right? Like any sort of bureaucracy or any sort of like large voting system is going to be slow. You're not going to be able to get like the full voter turnout that you want. That's something that's very difficult to do in like a very democratic election voting process, right? Which may be a topical idea for folks in the U.S. But so when you really distribute the voting power, right, that's going to be something that's going to be much slower. But if you give it to one or two or three people, or multi-sig of like 3 of 10 people, you could potentially like have something where you could change the rules on chain. When you do that, you are creating forever data, right? And you're creating data with rules that are like set in stone, like this is how it works, and this is like how we want to change it. That stuff right there is going to be like foundationally strong for you to build worlds on top of, right? So like we were talking about this idea of walled gardens. Well, if the data lives there, that's the key data, and the rules are already set in stone, there's no way to wall that garden, right? I mean, maybe you could with code from like the governance process, like then change it. But if you create it in such a way where you say like, these are the rules, these are the only things that we can change, then you can't just like cut off the API to people when it wasn't cut off before, right? People are always going to be able to access stacks, like you were talking about, Han, right? So like Han's not going to like suddenly say like, oh, hey, we have a huge user base of people using stacks, so now you have to pay us for the user base of stacks, right? Like that's there, that's set in stone, that's something that you can use, that's something that you could build on top of. These worlds that Han is talking about are worlds that are a strong foundation for somebody to come and build something on, right? You can trust that this is something that like you can build on and know, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years from now, that the rules are what they were when they were first set out, right? Which I think is super, super key. So to me, Forever World is this idea of being able to have data that you then use and then are able to collaborate on in many different places, whether it's a social app or a game or a metaverse, and you want to be able to pull those things in. And then we also talked about this idea of like a shared incentive, right? There's got to be a reason why those games want to pull your data in. And you could imagine that if you have a smart contract on Shape where you are saying, hey, if you want me to render this item in my world, you have to put it in this smart contract. And if you put it in this smart contract, you still have ownership of it. But by doing that, you are sending it over to my smart contract. I will read from that smart contract and render this new item in my world. So now by doing that, you are paying me essentially on the back end, right? Like that's the monetization. You're paying me and I'm being incentivized to collaborate with other people. So if I build a world and Han builds a world, like typically we would want to just build up our user bases, and eventually we would say like, okay, what's the best way to extract value from our user bases? But if this is your monetization strategy, is to collaborate with other people, potentially you get to this point where it's like, hey, Han, do you have anything new that I can implement in my world? Because I would love for people to enjoy that item from your world, bring it over to my world, and then we could collaborate on it and both get paid, right? And users at the end of the day enjoy playing fun games, enjoy our experiences so much that they're willing to either pay that, or you could imagine a world too where maybe that gas is like abstracted away from wallets or things that also make money from like trading fees, right? And so they're willing to pay that upfront cost of like people transferring from world to world, but then the trading fees eventually like sort of pay them back, and they can build a business model on that. So yeah, just super excited about that. That's like Forever World. I think the really cool thing that we really hit home on in a previous conversation was this idea that it could live way beyond the initial vision of its creators, right? So you could build something, walk away, unlike the open source idea that you mentioned. If you're an open source maintainer of a really important library, that's quite a commitment. But in this case, like, you could build something, you could put it out there, people could build on it for generations to come, and it could become something you never expected, right? I'm sure that's how the Bitcoin creators feel.
Oh, definitely. I think you put it so well. The I think I was not part of the first generation of people who discovered programming on computers, but I think this kind of like egalitarian utopian vision of collaborative programming. I think the intent was so good in that age, but then the systems of incentives just did not exist in the right framing. And so, what's so cool about Forever Worlds is that um, um, you know. So unlike a lot of ways that crypto is described, let's say in the media or on a surface level, uh, uh, a lot of crypto is built on very deep principles for example, not one person being able to control everything. For example, everything being by default kind of basically open source. And then and then everybody building on top of each other's works. Like all of this was built into crypto. Um, One thing, as time passed for crypto itself, I think maybe we actually even for crypto lost sight of essentially the worlds that we could create, and then we focused on, let's say, the financial aspects of um, let's make the let's make the payment systems that are built on top of the crypto like faster. Let's make it more efficient, and then we lost track of the original drive or the original principles that kind of inspired us. And so it almost feels like Shapecraft and Forever Worlds are um, calling back to the inspiration that kind of moved crypto initially, and that really is building worlds. And then, as you mentioned, a lot of the ways that this can work out is that if you build out a thoughtful kind of world slash universe, indeed, generations of people um, uh, uh, in the future might actually be building on what you built, and it's still going on. And it's that's such a crazy idea. Um, and then the fact that, for example, it's out in the open and cannot be changed. The rules have been set. Um, that would be such a fascinating kind of social experiment that could come out of all of this. And uh, uh, it's for me kind of hard to fathom like what are the worlds that actually could come out of this. And I'm so excited by whatever um, crazy idea somebody will implement. Like those ideas I'm really excited about. It really is like an open sandbox here. And Forever Worlds, the fact that it's collaborative, the fact that it's open, the fact that the incentives are set, and that it could actually be forever. I think those are some of the properties that could come out of a lot of the projects for Shapecraft, and really excited for them.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so cool the way you framed it. So many threads that I want to touch on there. And one thing that really stands out to me is like, we get really abstract here, right? And we're talking about like a big utopian vision. And I'm excited by it because logically I can think of the steps to get there. I think a lot of the times, like when we talk about abstract concepts, like there might be engineers out there like, how do they expect any of this be built? Right? And I think that's a totally fair thing. And to say like, okay, great, but like who's going to build the video games that are going to be like fun, and like how, video games take a long time to build, and like all that sort of thing. And I think one thing that's sort of missing from all of this This is a personal theory of mine, but one thing that's missing from video games in Web3 that we need to think more about is the advantage that we have of being in Web3, and we need to push that forward. The advantage of being in Web3, in my eyes, is this interoperability, this sharing of incentives, this ability to like collaborate and build worlds. Think about it from the player experience, right? Because that's what really matters. Is like at the end of the day, you need to think about your players' experience and is this fun for them? To me, the idea that I could go from one website to another website to an app to a VR app and have all of my items, all of my progress, all of my avatar, whatever it is, like aesthetics and things come with me is brand new, right? Like that idea of like, I mean, we kind of have like some connections via APIs over the internet, right? But they're like trusted connections that could be closed down later. It's always kind of janky. But the idea that we could have the data layer and then everything's built on top of it from a player experience, it feels like one continuous world, right? And your items might not be implemented everywhere, where like maybe that sword is only implemented in 4 of the 5 games that you play, right? And the 5th game, I mean, if enough people have that sword, the 5th game has an incentive to figure out a way to get that sword into their game, even if they're like an FPS or something, right? Like figure out a way to get that sword in there because then people will bring it over, right? And then they make money via gasback. So I think that's something that's like really interesting to me is like, can we iterate on really, really simple games, right? Like easy games, frictionless, like just maybe pop them open in the browser, be able to like play a couple games, like take it over to another game and see if that player experience is fun. I think it really will be. I think if we harken back the days of like arcade games, like really simple graphics, and you could see that like, oh wow, my progress lives with me. And like, I don't know, like again, I'll talk about Ready Player One, right? Ready Player One. Oh man, is this a spoiler? People have had to have read the book by now, right? Okay.
They, there was also a movie, so they kind
That's
of.
that's true, the movie, but this wasn't in the movie. All right, so if you haven't read the book and you're gonna read the book, pause for or turn the volume off for a second. I'm gonna give a spoiler. Uh, at one point in the book, he goes to an arcade, and I think it's like when the I read the book so long ago, but I think it's when it was like a lull in the character journey, and he's like playing an arcade, and it seems like meaningless, and he's not really doing anything that should be like tied to the main story, and he earns like a coin. I believe it was a coin. And later on, okay, I'm just going to go full spoilers, right? That coin turned out to be an extra life and saved him in the end in like the most epic moment of the book. And to think that you could do something similar to that, right? Like, can you imagine like one world where you earn something that seems so meaningless, but then in another world, it unlocks like a whole new character story, a whole new character, a whole new movement, a whole new room, right? That you couldn't access otherwise, right? Like, this is like the secret, like little area that you can only access because you played this other game that existed 10 years ago, right? And they're like, we want to harken back to those days of like when you played that arcade game 10 years ago. And we specifically know we can build an experience that would be fun for those people. You imagine if like, I don't know, pick your favorite video game and like, because you played that video game and you beat it 100%, like, I don't know, Super Mario World is such a big game that I used to love on the Super Nintendo, right? And because you beat it 100%, when you go play this new game, this latest MMO, they have like a specific room that you can go in that allows you to join other Super Mario World nerds. and like it's all like Super Mario, like I mean there's IP issues there, right? But like you can imagine like, it's themed for you and you could go in there and you could talk to other people and maybe even like play similar mechanics or things like that, right? Like and maybe that wasn't the best example because of the IP. And I know Nintendo goes after people like pretty hard on IP issues. But like you can imagine if these are games that are openly collaborative, that they would love that, right? Like go ahead and make a specific room for users from my game and render my items there. And then we share in the incentive to do that, right? I mean, then maybe we wouldn't have the IP issues that we have today because there's an incentive baked in. Like, yes, I want you to render my items in your world. Yes, I want you to bring my users over there because that extends their journey and we both get paid, right? It's a whole different sort of incentive model across the board.
Oh man, your example about the coin, because yeah, I've read Ready Player One and also watched the movie. But man, your example right there is so perfect because um, the yeah that moment where that coin was earned has no relevance at the moment. And I think if I recall correctly, it was like, oh, whatever, it's like some random coin, looks interesting, I'll just keep it. And then at the end, it's like, yeah, it was an extra life. And um, what what we're already seeing early signs of is actually for like for example a DeepL for DeepL, an item uh, uh, actually has like power in a game.
Mm.
So in a so there's a game coming up where um, and I think everyone will see it soon. But there's a game coming up where a DeepL item, if you equip it, so if you have a DeepL item, it'll actually appear in the game,
Mm.
and it'll look a little bit different because like the game has different aesthetics. But the fact that you have the item in your equipment, it gives power to that character inside of the game. And so we're already seeing those kinds of like completely unintended uses. For example, when DK designed that shirt, it wasn't like, oh, that shirt has a hit point of like has HP of 70 and there's this armor rating of 3 or something, right? But 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 the game developer, they're actually gonna assign some armor rating to the thing because it's some kind of armor, and some it adds some HP to the character. And so we're already seeing signs of this interoperability. Um, and then uh, basically, if you clear away a lot of the kind of like I guess a lot of the fog around uh, crypto when it is discussed in a very surface way, if you dig into it, it actually goes after so many of the principles that a lot of devs share. Because a lot of devs want like open source, they want interoperability, they want to build on top of each other's libraries and systems, and that's actually the world that is being enabled by crypto systems. And so uh, here uh, what is enabled by like Shapecraft and Forever Worlds and Shape is that uh, not only can these things happen in kind of like a financial sense of like building faster payment rails or things like that. Here it's like, well, let's go back to our roots of being inspired by worlds that we can build, and then bring the interoperability of and then building on top of each other's worlds. Let's make that happen. And so uh, really excited by interoperability. I think it's core. And then of course the incentivization to collaborate is afforded by gasback.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's also, as you were saying that, I was thinking of just like how many good examples there are out there of this idea of interoperability, but in like other forms of content, right? So like, I love I love to read fantasy books. Brandon Sanderson is like a huge author in the fantasy series, and what he loves is this idea of he has this one character who's a world hopper, and what it is it's a way to connect all of his books. So all of his books actually exist in this universe called the Cosmere, and it's great because I want to read every single one of his books because I know they're somehow relevant to the other books that I love, right? It may be not, he might be writing a new genre style ish in this one world because this world had a very interesting like dynamic to it. But I know that there's something that's going to happen in that world that's important for me to like learn a little bit about so I can bring it back to the main books that I really love, right? And maybe for some people, those little worlds are the ones that they really love, and they just love the lore connecting across all of those. And I think he does such a phenomenal job with that. And there's always that one character who's like there to like sort of chronicle everything that happens, and he's always kind of doing something in that world, and it's always like somewhat related to his like main character arc, which is super, super cool. Or like the MCU, you think of like Marvel, how they've really connected that across all the different hero movies. And like we love the fact that like you could just watch one and then like bring that into the other one. You see the characters sort of like come across each other. So I think there's a lot there that if you apply the creativity. So the other thing I wanted to touch on was like game designers are probably like sitting out there like, oh my God, you guys don't know what you're talking about as far as game design, because there's progression, there's all this thing you need to think about as a game designer. And I would agree with you. I think that, you know, I'm amateur game developer. I've always loved it, you know, amateur in the sense that like amateur meaning like you love it. You've never professionalized it, but you're in it for the love of it. I've always enjoyed that, and I've always admired people who can bring these like awesome games to life. And I would pose it to you as a game designer, maybe somebody who's coming into Shapecraft, to think about how you could use this and be creative with it, right? Like, how could you be creative with the progress? You don't want to bring something from one world, like suddenly, like a DeepL shirt allows somebody to then skip past the entire game, right? Then you lose the entire progression. What's the point? It's like a cheat code in your world. It doesn't make any sense. You lost all the progression, right? So there's some level of like figuring out how these things can be meaningful in those worlds for those particular audiences, such that you can draw those audiences in and you can sort of share those audiences with the other game developers. I think that's really hard to do. But that's why the incentive is there, right? That's why the incentive needs to be good and needs to be there. And if it's a key way to monetize and users love this, players love this, then I think that that's something that I don't know. It would be kind of interesting from my perspective of like, okay, wow, there's 100 items out there. How can I like incorporate 20 of these into my game in an interesting and new, novel way that's also connected to this giant universe? So I think that's something I wanted to call out as well. So like game designers, don't worry, like you don't have to implement every single item and they don't have to be super meaningful. You don't have to like create this like but the ones that you do will draw in those audiences, right? And they could even be just aesthetics, right? Like the bird on the shoulder or something you bring into a world, a little pet or something like that that can like follow you around, that like allows people to draw back from their previous experience playing a different game. Yeah.
Oh, I love it. By the way, mind blown because I didn't realize that there's a world hopper in Brandon Sanderson books. Because I've read a couple of his books and I'm gonna look into this now. I need to look into this.
Do you know which ones you read?
Yeah, Way of Kings,
Okay. Yeah.
and then the second book after that, and then Mistborn
Yeah.
series, the three
Oh,
books there.
he's in all of them. Yeah, Mistborn, he makes like cameos. So he like it's his name is Hoyd. He goes by a couple different names, but in Way of Kings, he's like the king's like jester. And this was like inspired by like another series as well. So he has a like a primary role in Way of Kings in the Stormlight Archive. In Mistborn, he just shows up as like a beggar on a corner, I think, or you see him in the distance, like he's like cameoing there.
Oh my
But
god.
like he's in some worlds, yeah, no, I know it's great. It's such a
Mind
cheeky
blown.
lore. Yeah, oh, it's so good. Yeah, recommend anyone read those books. They're so good. Yeah. Yeah.
Amazing.
And you know, there's other places in video games that I think have done this pretty well too. And people might have like if you played the Game Boys and you had like the link cables back in the day, they used to like try to like make it so that the games could connect. That was typically the same game to another same game. Like if you were trading across Pokemon, maybe you could trade from Pokemon Red to Pokemon Blue. Or I remember they used to hook up for Nintendo. Clearly, I played a lot in Nintendo. They used to hook up Sonic, so you could play Sonic on the GameCube and Sonic on your Game Boy Advance, and you could bring the chows, the little pets, across them, right? So you can, and those types of things always delighted me, right? This idea of like bringing it everywhere. And I remember I'll toss out Sega there too because oh well, Sega is Sonic, right? I guess they had like a Nintendo crossover there, but there used to be like there used to actually be this arcade game where you could go and you could like at Dave and Buster's, if you've ever been to one of those, where you could actually go and you there were these consoles that you could play and race horses. And I don't know if anyone's played this game. This is probably really obscure, but I loved it so much as a kid. It was like my favorite thing, and I wanted to just go back to Dave and Buster's every day. It like had me like and what you could do is you could put in your horse card into these consoles, and there were 8 consoles, so you could race with your friends, and you actually had like an RPG element where you were training your horses. And if all the horses raced and you won, you would get a reward. And then at the end of the day, you could print out your horse, and you could take your horse and you could like put it in a binder, have a bunch of different horses that you're racing. You could go to other Dave and Buster's locations and also put the horse in over there and race them and train them all over the world. Yeah, these types of things were like super, super cool, and I'm nerding out on them. But I think it's like a really interesting player experience that we could like really hone in on in the Web3 world. It's an advantage that they don't have in the Web2 space. You don't have to be a game developer, come into Web3 and say, I'm going to compete with the AAAs, because I mean, that's going to be really hard to do, right? Like that's even for the AAAs, even for the people that have been building these games for a long time, it takes many, many years to deliver on it. And oftentimes they fail, right? They don't, either the project gets scrapped or they don't deliver on what they expected to be able to deliver on. But if we compete at a different level, we compete at like the indie game developer level, where we say like, okay, there's an interesting thing that we could do here that's different. We could all collaborate, right? That's going to bring something new to the table that maybe could eventually then proliferate to, bigger games, right?
Oh man, I so agree with so many things that you just said. And then one thing I wanted to emphasize was like, earlier, maybe like 10, 15 minutes ago, you mentioned, oh, we should be careful, not talk about this thing because it's the intellectual property of like this thing. It's such a direct contrast, right, in this world, because if you create something, and because of gasback, etc., the more somebody uses your thing, the more you get. And so it's a completely inverted system. It's like, yes, please use my thing. Please use it as much as you want. and it's the exact same thing for everything else too, right? Somebody else built it, and then you want to use it. Oh, they want you to use it. It's not like, oh, this is my intellectual property. No, it's like, please use my thing. And it's such a powerful, like, we are used to a certain way of how the world works. And if you think about like property law, I'm certainly not, I'm not into the legal details of when property law actually started, but at some point, we got settled on a certain way of how property is owned, and it's been thousands of years, I assume. It has functioned this way. This is a complete inversion. It's like the more. I mean, let's say I have created this thing. The more somebody uses my thing, I get more. What a radically different world, and what a world that would be to live in and to create in. And uh, I I personally can't wait to help that world come into being versus the world that we live in today, where we're very careful about. Oh, gotta be careful about using that thing. That thing. It's they're very careful about this thing, and uh, it's so refreshing. I think to create that other world.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I got chills as you were saying it because, like, in fact, it is such an inversion because in the world where you get paid and the main monetization strategy is to collaborate, the worst thing that could happen for you is for everyone to say, we're not going to use your IP, right? That would be the worst thing. That would be like, I mean, that's a way to basically shut down somebody's business in that world, is to say like, actually, we think you're a bad actor and we're not going to use your IP. It's the exact opposite. Instead of saying like, nobody used my IP and we're going to stay in the castle and we're going to keep the stronghold. It's like, please use my IP. We'll be good, I promise, right? Like, we'll collaborate. We'll be great actors. We'll help build the universe, and we'll, like, that's exactly what you want, right? That's what we want. We want good actors. We want people that want to work together and want to like create a seamless user experience across the entire like universe of all games and things. Like Ready Player One, again, that's like in that universe, like the only way that could have been built is to have like this genius, like 10,000 million X developer who created all the worlds, right? And like that just doesn't exist. I mean, maybe AI is bringing us closer there. So that's kind of interesting. And we'll talk about like AI with game development. I think it is making things easier, but still you don't have that million X developer who can create like arcades on a small world where you could just like zoom into that world to build an arcade and like create this like massive content universe. Even when you have somebody big like Blizzard, right? Like it's really hard to pump out as much content as they do, and they're like a huge company, right? So like yeah, I think when we start to think about content that connects, we can collaboratively co-create a huge world. And maybe, you know, this is the next step in like multi or MMOs, right? Like massively multiplayer online games. To my surprise, I looked into this pretty recently. I haven't played MMOs since RuneScape and World of Warcraft. And to my surprise, I looked into this the other day. Those are still the biggest user bases. Those are still the biggest MMOs that exist today. And I'm like, oh man, that's so weird because I used to play those, right? I assumed there were way better games now that have come out that have surpassed those. But that's where those user bases are. And I wonder if it's maybe two things there, right? One is like, um, well, one I've seen from people, which is they don't want to move to another world because then they don't bring their progress and their friends and everything with them, which this exactly solves, right? You keep the data layer separate and incentivize people to build on top of it. Your data, your friends are everywhere in every single world that chooses to implement them. So that kind of goes away. But then also this idea of like creating and expanding content can be something that we can then move to everyone, right? All Shapecraft, everyone who's invited to Shapecraft, like all these skills that we want to see, whether you're a storyteller, you're an artist who can build like collectibles, an artist who can build designs and game assets, or you're a developer who can do Web3 smart contracts, or a developer who can build games, right? Like, and all the skills that go into building games, like all these things can be combined to create a world that grows and grows and grows, such that like this content base will absolutely dwarf the biggest MMOs that we've ever seen. You know, like that would be amazing, right? And maybe that's the next step, because I think these projects are extremely hard for these studios to take on. And you know, we've seen that with like quite a few of the MMOs lately, and I love those experiences. Those were great. Like, I mean, even the silly ones from back in the day, like I don't know, like the Habbo hotels and like the Neopets, right? Like all those things that were like fun social things. Where are those anymore? Right? You think we've moved so far in the internet age that it's so much easier with React and stuff to build like a web application. You would think we'd be like on Neopets 15, you know, version 15, where now it's like so much more interactive and fun, and you just go to Neopets and you're just like hopping around and everyone's having a great time. But you know, it doesn't. We don't really have those experiences anymore. At least that I've seen. Like, I don't really jump into any of them. They don't really attract my attention, and nobody that I really know is like spending a ton of time in these like experiences, right? What we have a lot more like social networks. We have our main like areas that we spend time in. And if you want to even like tell somebody about something you did on Twitter, you have to send them a link to Twitter, right? You can't just say, hey, I'm here, here's my post, because that post doesn't exist in this world. You have to send them over to Twitter world to go check that out, or X, right? I suppose it's X.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, so many of these things. I get so excited chatting about all this stuff with you because, like, we have such a like a shared understanding of what could be. Um, and then one thing that you said that really resonated was for a lot of game devs. If you look at the history of games, which is now decades, many decades into its history, uh, making games is like a serious business. Like we've learned how to make games, we've learned how to um, uh, create communities around games, and there's like a learned art to the whole thing. And then a lot of the space, like a lot of the vector space in game design, has already been it's already been exhaustively explored. And so when you have that kind of world, it's actually quite hard to make something really cool, make something really interesting, and uh, and often to do so, it requires, as you said, like a triple A game to be designed. It's more expensive than making like a big movie. It's just very expensive to make those like triple A games, um, and so the dreamers, the indie developers, doers, how can you create a game that makes a splash in that world? Well, there's certainly little corners that have not been explored, and that's how some indie games do like go really big. But a lot of that has been explored, whereas this kind of like completely inverted incentive system, these forever worlds, I would say has been. If I had to compare, like it's really not been explored at all. We have some games that have tried to do it, and they were fun for a time, and it didn't work out for various reasons. But the design space, the vector space of this quadrant of game design has actually not been explored, and that's such an exciting moment when you, as a protection practitioner of a specific art, if you have the opportunity to go into uncharted land and like explore the land, and that was what it was exactly the case for games like decades ago. The first people who kind of ventured out into the world of games, there were no rules, there were no like books that you look at. It was all by trying stuff out, by hacking things, and loving the games, and loving the craft of creating games. That was those were the first explorers of that land. And then decades later, it has turned into this like tried and true like systems, um, for this land that is unexplored. That is the moment for game devs, that has not come around in a long time for the area of game design. And so, what could be more exciting than land that is unexplored? Could be a completely different way uh, to actually build businesses on top of games. It's such an interesting topic, and there really are no books written about like how to design games in this world, how to design worlds in this way. You are the first explorers, and who knows, maybe something that somebody creates in Shapecraft like becomes like a huge thing, and then everybody studies it, and then the person who created it and the team that created it, they're the people who are studied. That's the chance, and I'm pretty excited about that. And that's the thing that I think that gets me out of bed every morning, the chance to be the first explorers of something that's really new.
That's so cool. Yeah, it really is. It could be like a whole platform publisher paradigm shift of something where you are the pioneers. You push it forward, right? That is amazing. We don't see that super often. I think this is the opportunity. Get out there. This is the call to action, right? So go check out Shapecraft, right? Like I wonder what other CTAs we can give out there. Go check out Shapecraft. Go to shape.network/Shapecraft. I think most of those words are pretty straightforward to spell. Shape Network, Shapecraft. And we'll leave a link down below on YouTube and X, so you can check that out there. What else? What other CTAs? If you want to learn anything in the Web3 space, go to Alchemy University. We have a whole bunch of stuff where you can learn smart contracts. You can learn how to interact with smart contracts. So if you want to learn any of that stuff, if you're like a game developer, Web2 developer, you want to be able to like help out in the Shapecraft space and be able to find somebody that you can work with to bring some of these things to life, definitely check out those courses. Join the Shape Discord, right? We have some channels in there already for like team formation and for ideation. There's already a lot of activity of folks talking about like what can be built for Shapecraft. I mean, people are getting super excited for good reason. This is so awesome. Yeah, what else? Do you have any other CTAs, huh?
Yeah, I think you covered it. Yeah, basically go to the Shapecraft website and then register, and that would take you through to Alchemy's registration platform. And then, yeah, the two Discords, Alchemy Discord and then the Shape Discord. And then, of course, follow Shape on Twitter /X, and also Alchemy for all updates related to Shapecraft.
This is awesome. This has been such a great conversation. And I love where we ended it too, the high note of like, you are the pioneers. Get out there and do it. We can't wait to see all of you in Shapecraft. And it's been such a pleasure talking to you, Han, and look forward to seeing you all out there.
This was an amazing conversation. I think we could actually go for hours, but and I think after this recording ends, I think we'll go for hours. But has been amazing, and likewise, I can't wait to see all the things that will be built. New worlds will materialize, and that is beyond exciting.